Good morning from beautiful Kingston, Jamaica, and welcome back to the Knowledge Network online forum series organized by the Tourism Linkages Network, a division of the Tourism Enhancement Fund, an agency of the Ministry of Tourism, Jamaica. I'm your moderator and host for today's forum, Taisha Turner, Director of Tourism Trade and International Relations in the Ministry of Tourism. Now, to remind you the background for the Tourism Linkages Network, they play an essential role in supporting the tourism industry's goal of achieving growth and development targets through the creation and the strengthening of linkages between local suppliers of goods and services and the tourism industry. The network continues to play a key role in creating collaborative relationships that build capacity and sustainability, which are drivers of socioeconomic advancement. The work of the Tourism Linkages Network impacts stakeholders across a number of industries and sectors, specifically agriculture, manufacturing, gastronomy, sport and entertainment, shopping, health and wellness, and of course, knowledge. Since 2016, the network has executed projects and programs which have provided opportunities for local suppliers to access the tourism supply chain, as well as to contribute to the diversification of Jamaica's tourism product using these passion points: gastronomy, health and wellness, knowledge, shopping, sport and entertainment. What are your passions? The Knowledge Network, which is the reason why we're here today, in keeping with its objective to foster the growth of the tourism knowledge economy, has engaged in the development of strong intellectual and practical partnerships and linkages from which knowledge can be leveraged and applied. Today's forum focuses on the topic of climate change and tourism. This is a timely discussion given Jamaica's Blue Ocean strategy, which will seek enhanced value creation through product differentiation and diversification, thereby allowing destination Jamaica to be more sustainable, appeal to new markets, and stimulate new demand. This is even more timely as the daily news is inundated with reports and accounts of the impact that the climate crisis has had on lives, livelihoods, and jobs. Small island developing states like Jamaica must be proactive, therefore, in implementing adaptation strategies, which will reduce the risk of climate change, which stands to impact a number of other sectors which provide necessary inputs for the tourism products, such as agriculture, water resources, human health, infrastructure, and coastal ecosystems. Therefore, tourism development strategies and practices must be increasingly designed with the view of promoting more resource-efficient initiatives that are aligned with goals of sustainable consumption and production. Now, I'm only your guide through this program, but it's my pleasure to introduce you to the esteemed panelists who are the experts on this topic. First, we have Professor Lloyd Waller, Executive Director of the Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center, Mr. Richard May, Chief Executive Officer, Risk, Energy and Sustainability for Ecos Consulting Limited, Mr. Glenville MacLeod, Assistant Lecturer in the Department of Government at the University of the West Indies, Mona, and Mr. Gavin Palmer, Corporate Manager, Environment, Health and Safety at Sandals Resort International. Welcome, gentlemen. Now we'll begin with Professor Waller, who is a Professor of Digital Transformation Policy and Governance in the Department of Government at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus, and over the last 10 years has published over 100 articles, books, book chapters, scientific research papers, and technical reports on subjects including digital transformation, information and communication technologies for development, electronic governance, and innovations in governance. Professor Waller has also managed several local, regional, and international research projects which focus on harnessing information and communication technologies for the development of Jamaica. Professor Waller sits on several national, regional, and international committees, boards, and commissions. And as indicated, he is the Executive Director of the Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center. Professor Waller, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Turner, and thank you for having me here. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is having a restive and peaceful morning. Today, I'd like to talk to you about 10 lessons that I have observed in the last 3 years as the Executive Director for the Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center. And these are the 10 lessons that we've learned based on observing what we call tourism climate resilience. And these are managing projects that in the tourism space that help to mitigate against negative climate outcomes. So we know for a fact that climate change is a problem that's well established, and we know that billions of dollars have been spent trying to ensure that we as a species, wipe out ourselves off the planet. Tourism plays an important role in terms of being a contributor in some instances to the climate-related issues. Specifically, we have airplanes that fly from one destination to the other. We recognize that people are traveling more, and there are concerns, for example, such as over-tourism. But the problem is actually not just one of that tourism impacts the environment, but tourism is also dependent on the environment. As you know, once there is a tsunami or a hurricane in one of these tourism-dependent countries, that can have a significant impact on that country's ability to generate income, employment. If there are heat waves, for example, in countries that are dependent on advertising ski-related activities, that can have a significant impact on the tourism product itself. So generally speaking, there's this kind of symbiotic relationship between tourism and the environment. And we recognize as persons who work in the tourism space that we have to play our role in terms of ensuring that our own sustainability is guaranteed. And our sustainability essentially depends on our ability to ensure that we have positive climate outcomes. Now, one of the solutions that we have, I'm just advertising here. One of the solutions that I recognize in the last couple of years has been essentially the GTRCMC. Sorry, I needed to throw in that little plug, Madam Coordinator, and with that plug, I seem to, fine, great, all right. And the GTRCMC is an international organization and think tank that was established by our founder and chairman, Minister the Honorable Edmund Bartlett. And it essentially emerged out of the 2018 conference that we had on jobs and inclusive growth, whereby persons in the tourism sector essentially said that they needed to have an institution that focused specifically on their sustainability. And there was a recognition that sustainability and resilience are inherently connected. And for sustainability to happen, you have to be resilient. And Minister Bartlett manifested a brilliant idea of a center that helps to transform the tourism space by preparing institutions to manage a disruption and helping them to recover from a disruption in and of itself. So the GTRCMC has 4 thematic areas: climate and seismic, tourism, climate and seismic resilience, tourism, pandemic and epidemic resilience. As you can imagine, for the last 2 years, we've been doing a lot of work on the second thematic area, tourism, security, cybersecurity resilience, which is an area we're now just breaking into as it relates to projects, and tourism entrepreneurial resilience. And our work essentially covers research and development, policy advocacy and communication management, project management, training and capacity building, and a new area that we've established. This is an area that we've essentially defined in ourselves, because it doesn't really exist in the development lexicon. And this is actually being a crisis management intermediary, whereby we broker between the crisis need and the entities that can fix that can address that particular crisis, and that is one that we're particularly proud of. We're headquartered in Jamaica, but we have offices all over the world. We have 4 offices that are established thus far, which are our offices in Kenya, Canada, and the Middle East, plus the Jamaican office itself. But we have affiliates and strategic partners. And everywhere where you see one of these GTRCMC are centers that will be opened in the next 2 years, and they already have started operation, but we just have not formalized it as yet. So I don't want to refer to them as GTRCMC. So we have 4 open centers and the rest are affiliates, but by the end of next year, all of these will essentially represent centers across the world. Now, okay. Now, we have a number of projects, and what I did was to pull out the data from all of the projects across the different countries that focus on climate-related activities, and these are projects that range from thought leadership to fundraising activities, to logistical activities, to training and capacity building. So it's a myriad of projects, and I pulled it and did a kind of deep dive in the data just for this particular purpose. And thank you, Taisha. It gave me an opportunity to prepare a document. So what we do as a part of our project activity is that we usually apply well, we don't use deliverology anymore, but we usually apply the lessons learned methodology that is taken from project management. And it is essentially a methodology that, when you're conducting a project, you look for the negative and positive outcomes. You look at what are the activities, what are we learning, what are the mistakes, how do we fix the mistakes, and we have persons who make comments and recommendations. So it's a typical methodology used in project management that we've adopted for our projects. And from that, I was able to pull lost my mouse here. You're back. I was able to pull some lessons, 10 lessons. I'm sure there are more. I mean, not necessarily 10, perhaps probably 200. I dumped it in NVivo, which is a qualitative data analysis software program. Asked it to pull up all of the different themes. There were perhaps 200. I had them reduced to 10. I'm sure it's going to go on to less than this once I do some further deep dive into the data itself. I probably need to get an algorithm to do something in terms of looking at the text analysis. So let me just go through some of the lessons that we learned. So the first one is that there is a need for a development first philosophy in doing project management. There needs to be a recognition that, the lay of the land, who are the persons who are participating in this work, how is this work connected to the overarching development of the country, because you can't be doing a project that is disconnected from the development priorities of that particular country or the region itself. So it is important for that cohesion to occur, and you certainly will not get buy-in if it is not in sync with the national development plans of that country or that region. So there's a need to have that understanding of that development first philosophy. I actually didn't do the highlighting, I didn't do the highlighting, I'm sorry. The second one was, it is important to forge partnerships, PPPs. I mean, I don't think I need to delve directly into this, but we do recognize that the government plays an important role as it relates to managing projects and ensuring that the tourism space is beneficial to all stakeholders and partners. But in some instances, it may be very difficult for the government to be able to do certain aspects of this. And it is inherently important that the tourism sector, especially the private sector organizations, work together. I think Jamaica has one of the best models where it comes to that kind of PPPs between the private sector and the government when you look at all of the other case studies around the world. And it is certainly a model to be duplicated in many other countries that are now just embarking on a very serious tourism-related activity. Now, the next thing that we learned is that it is important to have strategic leadership through capacity building. Managing projects, especially tourism projects, can be very complicated. And very often we see that when we are funding projects or we engage with some of our stakeholders to execute projects, these persons don't necessarily have the capacities, project management capacities, the project appraisal capacities, the monitoring and evaluation capacities to manage the project. They may be there because they are a political appointee, they may be there because of whatever reasons, but whatever reason it is, it's important for that person's capacity to be built to manage the project. We found that most of the projects that lag or struggle most of the climate-related projects that lag or struggle are projects that with persons who have no experience in tourism management or climate tourism management. And as a result of that, we have found that when we provide the training and capacity building for them and give them the ability and the capabilities and the knowledge about how to manage the project, that the outcomes are generally much better. And the second one is to connect climate change to sectoral policies. So in addition to looking at the overarching government national framework, it's also important for you to connect with specific government policies. It's a very delicate balance. I've seen here in Jamaica it working in tourism. I've seen it working in agriculture and certainly in finance, whereby you're tying the project to, let's just say, Vision 2030, but at the same time, it's also, which is a long-term strategy, but at the same time, in the now, it's also tied to the strategic imperatives of a particular ministry or a particular sector. So we're all working together to get a specific outcome. And when it comes to managing climate-related projects, especially in the tourism space, this particular activity is inherently important. And as important as the next one, which is engaging civil society and encouraging behavior change. You know, part of the problem with managing with climate-related projects is that it has a lot to do with human behavior. And to be sustainable at a scale, it must be a whole of society approach. And there needs to be a number of outreach programs to raise awareness about the impact of the climate or your actions on the climate. And this goes to the tourists themselves in a particular country. This goes to the persons who work at the resort who can monitor the activities of the tourists and also make correction when it's needed. And I've seen this work and actually it has actually been beneficial to us in Africa in particular. And since we're on Africa, one of the lessons we've learned from some of the projects in Africa is that it's an important to involve young persons. These persons have the energy, these persons have the vision, these persons have the ideas, they have their modalities, they understand the modalities. You know, some of us, we're old, you know, we look at some of the things that they do and we're very disconnected from them, but at the same time, they are also our consumers, and they are also persons who impact the environment. And it's very important to get them aware of their responsibility, their role, how they can make a change. And we found that our Africa projects, in terms of involving young persons, there was a significant problem with one of our wildlife projects where we were battling poachers in parts of Kenya. And once we got young persons to be the voice of reason, they would go back to their villages and have a conversation with the other persons who are poachers there to tell them about the impact of poaching on the economy itself, to explain to them that the tourism is dependent on the wildlife park. And if the wildlife park is gone, you won't have any money. Your mother won't have any money to come here. And they're more listen to their peers than the adults. And we found that was an outreach program, and that was phenomenal for us. Research. How am I with time, Taisha? I don't get my 5-minute market.
You are at 3 minutes, Professor.
All right, I'm going a little bit faster. Okay, so research, don't want to go fast where that's concerned, but it's very important, especially when it comes to climate decision making, where you want to forecast or predict specific events. It's important on one hand for the data collection, for the research, for the data analytics, to get your data scientists to look at some of the issues, but it's also important to be able to share the information. And that's one of the problems that we face in small and developing states. We don't really share information. We don't have a national dashboard for data. And then we have communication management, whereby it's important for you to be able to communicate to your stakeholders between and among the different persons you work with about the different climatic solutions, the different opportunities, the impacts activities may have on climate. And then we have the use of new technologies and innovative tools. And we have several projects that we've worked on here, and we have two levels. We have technologies that are specific for the climate. So for example, we have a project right now we're doing in Canada where we want to focus on, in Jordan, we want to focus on looking at specific cottages or houses for tourists to use that will not have will not have a significant impact on the environment. We're also looking in this for the same wildlife project. We're looking at alternative means of securing the space itself rather than using what they're currently using, which also impacts the animals in a negative way. When they go up against these fences, it hurts them and contributes to their ability to live longer. So we're looking at alternative solutions there, but we also have technologies from digital technologies, such as pushing the use of cloud technologies through across hotels in some of our territories as a mechanism from moving away from these places that these servers that are on an electricity grid to data centers that are powered by renewable energy, which is quite interesting. And the last point I'd like to make is that all of this can only be possible if we have the financial capabilities to do so. So part of what is also important is, but as it relates to the partnership, as it relates to grant funding, is always being on the lookout for funding opportunities to be able to drive your projects. And thank you. I think that is I think I did it exactly in 15 minutes, right? Give or take 1 or 2 seconds.
That you did, Prof. That you did. So thank you to Professor Waller for his 10 lessons in tourism climate resilience management. And what was importantly highlighted by Professor Waller was not only the value of effective conservation and management elements and efforts for tourism, but also the contribution that tourism itself can make to the negative impacts on the environment. And we're mindful that without the environment, there really is no tourism. Only this morning, I was seeing on BBC World, the Minister of Tourism of Kenya, you mentioned Kenya, Professor, Najib Balala, was saying that climate change is killing more elephants than poaching, 20 times more elephants than poaching, because now Kenya is facing the most severe drought they've ever had in over 40 years. And they have, as at, I think, the end of June, 176 elephants dying. They have 36,000 elephants. And we all know when you go to Kenya, one of the attractions is the game reserves, the wildlife, to see the wildlife. So you can see the connection clearly between climate change and tourism. And our next speaker, Mr. Richard May, has had an early career in the fields of sustainability standards and tourism. And Richard currently guides organizations with their sustainability strategies from idea to implementation. His consulting firm, ECOS, which stands for the work that they're doing in environment, conservation, occupational health and safety, as well as sustainability, has worked with entities in the Caribbean, such as Sandals Resorts and government agencies in Antigua and Barbuda, as well as regional organizations such as the Pan American Health Organization, the Inter-American Development Bank, and EarthCheck. Now, Richard's passion is in fixing things. He likes to address shortfalls in businesses and their operations in almost any field. And this is evident in his extensive private sector client list, which includes noted organizations in hospitality, banking, telecommunications, and agriculture. Richard is also an individual member of the Association of Energy Engineers and is a certified energy manager. So, Richard, I want you to tell us how hotels possibly, or how any of your clients possibly are viewing the climate change, the real or primary risks or perceived risks, and some solutions that you can give them to address this. You have the floor. I think you might still be muted, Richard.
I am very much muted. Thank you very much, Taisha. Morning, everybody, and thank you, Prof, for that wonderful introduction to this webinar. Taisha, you mentioned just now that climate change is killing 20 times more elephants in Kenya than poaching, which realistically ties perfectly into what Prof is saying and ties into what I'm going to delve into as what industry players, primarily hotels, see as their immediate risks and challenges due to climate change. And one of the things is, in fact, loss of value. Value here, I'm referring to things like what you have to offer. Sightseeing with elephants, going to Dunn's River Falls, a dive at a reef half mile out, a mile out, and so on and so forth. When you have the threats or the impacts of climate change, where these things disappear or get significantly reduced, then one has to go further afield to find them, one. And two, if you can find them. And two, it reduces the perceived value of the traveler to your location, your destination, what it is you actually have to offer to industry. Of course, hotels also look at climate change as a direct threat to business. If you have not much to offer, or if your sun and sea becomes, sun and sea, and you don't have a beach on which to have sand for your guests to relax, then your offer is severely depleted. Now, not only to business, but also to the surrounding community, right? So there are these things: the loss of value, the loss of business, the loss of resources in terms of people. There's the impact on healthcare. Right now we have the issue of Sahara dust, poor air quality issues, and so on. And 5 years ago, you had a 2-week spell where you'd have a Sahara dust issue. 15 years ago, we would talk about haze, but I knew it was Sahara dust, or it wasn't mentioned. This year, we've been doing what? A good 6 weeks of Sahara dust, and there's no end in sight, so to speak. As a matter of fact, 3 weeks into our foray with Sahara dust this year, I looked online and I saw a bigger swath of dust coming across the Caribbean region than what we'd handled in the 3 weeks prior. So it's these kinds of things that hotels see as immediate threats, today threats. Of course, you deal with things like exposure to new diseases because of, loss of habitats, and maybe whether poorly planned or ill-conceived development, which now leads to new viruses being exposed, and so on and so forth. We need not discuss what COVID did to the entire global industry 2 years ago. We're still recovering. All right. So it's things like these that the hotels see as today's threat. And then, of course, there's the very blatant increased expense factor related to things like heat involved or heat driven extra use of air conditioning and the likes. So these are the kind of things that our clients face, and that when you speak to them about sustainability and climate change, these are the things that immediately jump onto the table. All right. The Prof went through a few things a while ago, and from an industry perspective or a hotel's perspective, some of the things that we discuss with our clients and with our staff now being, I'm taking the role of the hotelier, to get them to understand what climate change is we'll talk to them about sea level rise. Sometimes when you see the beach loss, it's not just a matter of erosion. Sometimes we're also looking at higher tides and the likes, which come with your concepts of sea level rise. The long term, I won't say proposal, but the long term view of what our end game is, if we should have our polar ice caps melt, is not a very fancy or wonderful vision. Most of our oceanfront hotels or beachfront hotels will become dive sites. And that's not something that augurs well for the operator or the industry or the country on a whole. Because again, when you talk about climate change and hotels and tourism, you have to include the community. It's not just that 10 or 20 or 50 acres of property that you have, and within those four walls, you have all the people who are dependent on that, and all the people who live around who also get affected by these impacts or these issues of climate change. All right. We look also at increasingly threatening weather events or extreme weather events, where when we hear hurricane season now, we do remember Hurricane Andrew and Hurricane Gilbert, but they were, once in a while you get that kind of a threat. Now every hurricane season we're looking at, okay, how devastating is our hurricanes going to be, and how many are we going to have? And these are all things tied to global warming, climate change, climate impact. For a hotel, we at home may say, okay, hurricane coming and we run and we get 2 tins of corned beef and a tin of sardine and some biscuits and stuff. For a hotel, sporting 200 rooms, having 400 to 600 guests in house, it is not a minor feat to plan for a hurricane that is 4 or 5 days away. You are looking at, can I get airlift to get as many people out of the island as possible? Do we have enough water supply to hold these people? Should it be a devastating hurricane and they have to be in the hotel for another 2 to 3 weeks as we clear the airport, clear the roads, and so on? You're looking at food accessibility. You're looking at healthcare or medical care availability. And then from the facility itself, do we have enough, as simple as plyboard? Do we have enough plyboard to secure the facility so we don't have to pull on our insurance immediately after the event? And more importantly, so we can open next week as opposed to 2, 3, 4 months down because of the kind of damage. So it's when we look at some of these things, the risk factor, the immediate risk factor is a very heavy burden to bear. It's a very technical concept to carry and work through for the hotels. All right. Again, when we talk about, I think I mentioned earlier, the impact of increased weather events. I mean, right now in the UK, and you do have tourism in the UK, that would be affected by the weather. We had, what was it, 40 degrees, 41 degrees the other day. They shut down runways and train lines and so on and so forth. That will impact their tourism. Here in Jamaica, as much as, or here in the Caribbean, as much as people come for the sun, sand, and sea, and they want to have a suntan, if our temperatures get to 40 degrees, there will be nobody on the beach trying to get a suntan. You're going to get sunburned, and they all know this. So again, the value and the pull factor gets affected by all of these things which are climate change related. All right, so when, and then of course you do have the immediate health impacts for persons who may be predisposed to the heat related events or even general climate change related events, asthmatics, diabetics, and so on, who may work in your entity. You end up with more persons calling in sick, increased medical bills, increased insurance coverage for these persons. So the operating impact is an ongoing running list of expenses and threats really to your survival as an entity. Before I run out of time, let me jump into some of the solutions that our hotels and partners focus on or should focus on. The first thing, and it comes out of one of the things on the Prof's list, is partnerships for development. Hotels don't exist in a vacuum. Hotels live and die on the delivery of service, usually by staff who live in the surrounding communities. If you are not partnering with the staff, if you're not ensuring they have good schools for the kids, if you're not ensuring they have good waste disposal, if you're not ensuring that they have good access to the things that are needed for life, water, electricity, and so on and so forth, you cannot deliver a good service to your clients. So it is imperative that entities look at ways in which they can support the surrounding community and not just on Labor Day, right? You have a number of foundations and associations and friends of the communities that do very well at this. And I think Gavin will get into that when he speaks about Sanders and Sanders Foundation and so on. That, you know, sometimes we gloss over them and we don't realize what it takes to deliver what they do. Gavin, to jump a bit into your space, the Sanders Foundation, I think in 2020 spent nearly $12 million on, or gave nearly $12 million in legitimate, tangible solutions, from education to environmental support, you know, beach cleanups, marine park developments, and so on, for the sole purpose of ensuring that the message of environmental sustainability and community partnership and the value of what is tourism is understood and is pushed forward. All right. And it's more of these kind of things. We need to, as hotels, as entities, understand that our vendors need to be a part of our process, whether it be a farmer, and we need to make sure that the farmer is operating in a way that meets the needs of our entities or our hotels, or it's an importer, or it is a local consultant that may be coming in. The value chain, the importance of having these persons or these entities understand that you operate towards the betterment of the environment is critically important. All right. The second thing would be what I consider decarbonization strategies. And this is where you get into things like looking at renewable energy solutions and energy conservation solutions, things that reduce your carbon footprint. We're not even going the full gamut of environmental footprint now, but just your carbon footprint. And your carbon footprint is important because the major marking factor on what is causing climate warming or global warming is carbon concentration in the atmosphere, whether as carbon monoxide, methane, or as carbon dioxide. So decarbonization strategies are a wonderful way to, or an important way, not just wonderful, but an important way to make legitimate, tangible impact to positive impact to reducing the negative impacts of climate change. All right, a wider focus on sustainability usually helps this decarbonization strategy. Most times when we discuss with hotels, you know, what do you focus on with your staff? Awareness is critical. Staff need to know why you're asking them to do what you're asking them to do. Telling somebody turn off the light, turn off the water, and so on is all wonderful. If you don't have a wonderful relationship with them or they're upset with you today, you know what, I leave it as your bill. You come turn it off if you want it off, kind of thing. But when they understand that this turning off a light is not about me saving money as a hotel, it's about us being able to live in this space a year, 10 years longer, because we've managed to do our bit to avert a further climate emergency, then they're more more inclined to deliver on that. Because obviously it has personal value to them. All right. We tend to focus on things like energy, water, and waste, not only because they save money, but because they're tangible. When you can get persons to see that, you know, we've reduced energy and see that they've stopped water wasting and physically reduced the amount of waste, then all of the other subliminal messaging that you and activities you want them to perform are likely to stick because they have a reference that is physical and tangible. All right. And then of course the third thing I would say is your commitments to purchasing responsibly and commitments to operations. Purchasing responsibly, no plastics, minimal purchasing of anything that can't be recycled, no access or no use of aerosols or otherwise harmful chemicals in your operation. And you have many companies at this point that do offer environmentally friendly products. When you're looking at, and again, I mentioned earlier, decarbonization. Right now in Jamaica, we have the JHTA working with the JERA project funded by the USAID, where every hotel and manufacturing entity has the opportunity to have their facility assessed by a group of technical experts for free to determine whether or not solar, one, makes sense for them, or two, how much it can cost them. And they're doing this at no, sorry, the wind is creating havoc in my living room. They're doing this at no cost to the end user. Their entire goal is to determine if solar makes sense and how you can go about it. And then they put you over to pre-selected contractors, I believe, who will have a conversation with you about how to go forward. This is a kind of access that hotels need to capitalize on, because here, before today or before now, you'd have had to pay some consultant to come in, do these assessments for you and tell you, you know, what your value to solar, what solar's value to you is. Now you're getting it for free. So things like that we expect under your purchasing commitments or your accessibility commitments, you would capitalize on and stuff like that. And then for your operation, I mentioned earlier things like, awareness of the staff, having an attitude of conservation, an attitude towards climate betterment. So no burning, policies for no burning of things, no dumping, and not just for the beautification of the property, but as an entrenched value position that we are maintaining a clean environment. All right. Focus on technology improvements, and again, using tech improvements for energy efficiency and conservation tend to give your staff the feeling that you're genuinely interested in making a change. All right. So things like that are really the kind of things that we focus on with our clients and within industry. I think much of the rest of the commitments on the operational side, Gavin will cover in his presentation. So I'm gonna remit the floor to you at this point. Taishan, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Richard. So you've just heard from Richard May, who is the CEO, Risk, Energy and Sustainability for Echoes Consulting Limited. And I just want to say a special welcome to our audience on social media. If you're watching on YouTube, Instagram, or Facebook, be sure to subscribe and or follow the Tourism Enhancement Fund at TEF Jamaica. That's TEF-JAMAICA. And I know some of you are already indicating the questions that you're burning to ask our presenters, and we have not forgotten you. We have a question and answer segment at the close of the presentations where we'll take your comments. But thank you, Richard, for that excellent intervention and presentation. And I just wanted to highlight, when you mentioned that example of the UK, it was one of the things that came to my mind. But not only in terms of how it affects tourism in the UK, but the fact that the UK is one of Jamaica's top source markets for tourists. So if the planes can't take off, then the UK tourists are not coming to Jamaica, and that's even more detrimental from our perspective. And I was very happy that you touched on the individual responsibility element of it, because that is something that we all need to bear in mind as we go about our daily works, whether it affects our profession or not. Personally, how are we working to address climate change and its impacts? And I like to give statistics. The reason why I like to give statistics, I think sometimes it helps when we hear these big, drastic figures that are coming out of different international organizations. So last week, there was a Latin American and Caribbean Climate Week for 2022 in preparation for the 27th Conference of State Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, what they call COP27, which will be in Egypt, Sharm el-Sheikh. And in preparation for that meeting, one of the outcomes was the World Meteorological Organization launched a report that was specific on the state of the climate in Latin America and the Caribbean. And they indicated that this region was the hardest hit. And this is in keeping with some of the reports that we also have coming out of the UN. When you look at OCHA, the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, they had a report as far back for covering 2000 to 2019, where they indicated that over 1,205 disasters were affecting 152 million people in the region. And even more recently, you have a Bloomberg report that is indicating, and you mentioned, Richard, extreme weather events, that extreme weather events linked to climate change were costing US $65 billion just for the first half of 2022. I think this is reason enough to want to spur us individually and otherwise into action for climate change, not only just in tourism, but in other areas. But here we're focusing on tourism. And so I want to welcome my next speaker, who is Mr. Glenville McLeod. And Glenville is the assistant lecturer in the Department of Government at the University of the West Indies, Mona. And his first degree, he has a bachelor's in international relations, followed that with a master's in government, specializing also in international relations. But specifically for his research, He focused on Jamaica's adaptability to a green economy. And as you can see there, he's going to focus on how the green economy can serve as a solution for climate change issues with specific reference to the tourism industry. Mr. Cloud, you have the floor. I think you're still muted, Glenville.
Thank you so much for my introduction. So for today, I'll be discussing the concept of a green economy, its proposition and applicability to small and developing states like Jamaica as a solution for climate change issues. Now, what exactly is the green economy? Now, the term in of itself finds its roots way back in 1989 by a report done by environmental economists for the government of the United Kingdom entitled Blueprint for a Green Economy. However, it was in 2008, with the global economic crisis that was coupled with the ongoing ecological crisis, that the term in office of green economy was revived as a response to what we call the multiple crises. Now, between 2008 and 2010, the United Nations Environment Programme gradually shaped what policy actions would essentially stimulate economic recovery and at the same time improve sustainability of the world. Now, within the confines of its leadership role, the UNEP defined the green economy as one that is low carbon, resource efficient, and socially inclusive. And from an operational standpoint, such an economy would require both public and private investments in sectors like tourism, focusing on reducing emissions and pollution, enhancing energy and resource efficiency, and preventing the loss of biodiversity and ecosystems services. Such actions, as underscored in the UNEP document towards a green economy, pathways to sustainable development and poverty eradication, indicates that a green economy recognizes the value of and invests in natural capital. It is central to poverty alleviation. The green economy creates jobs and enhances social equity. It provides substitutes such as renewable energy and low carbon technologies for fossil fuels, and it promotes enhanced resource and energy efficiency. Now, the word green in of itself has become a popular catchphrase for international aid agencies, development planners, politicians, multinational corporations, and even non-governmental organizations. As a result, concepts such as green growth, green development, and even sustainable development are often used interchangeably with the term green economy. Now, while the term green growth and green economy gained traction in 2008 as a result of the economic recession, both terms represent forms of green stimulus spending. Now, they are different in that the green growth strategy aims to foster economic growth and development while ensuring that natural assets are used sustainably and continue to provide resources and environmental services on which our well-being relies. In a much more simplistic sense, green growth looks at a continuation of current economic growth with a simultaneous focus on recognizing the role of natural capital in the planning process and national accounting. Green economy, however, is much more geared towards economic transformation, which would be gained largely through green investments in key sectors that create or reinforce the natural capital of the earth. Green development perspectives, on the other hand, advocate for greening of the economy with a strong focus on the social pillar of sustainable development. And so green development essentially advocates a new model of production and consumption that includes change in existing concepts of welfare, with a view essentially to to measuring welfare differently. Now, this change in measuring expresses a shift from a monetary understanding of welfare that is largely represented by GDP indicators to one that necessitates an inclusion of other well-being indicators. Now, while the improvement in social welfare and justice is a feature of the green economy, the solitary focus on social features is not targeted as a main means of transformation. Sustainable development, a term that was largely made popular by the 1987 report or Common Future, defines it as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, despite the vagueness and criticism of this particular concept as being oxymoronic in some sense, and what we should understand in its simplistic sense is that sustainable development speaks to the process in which economic, environmental, and social conditions guide development. Now, where the term sustainable development is concerned, what I want to make abundantly clear, particularly for this presentation, is that the green economy is not a removal of the term sustainable development, but it's more so viewed as a tool in achieving sustainable development. All right. In looking at the green economy and small island developing states, SIDS can be defined as a group of countries that have small population, limited resources, susceptibility to natural disasters, vulnerability to external shocks, and excessive dependence on international trade. Now, the particular vulnerabilities of SIDS gained great international attention in 1992 through the Rio Earth Summit, and in 1994 with the Global Conference on Sustainable Development of SIDS. Now, these vulnerabilities became increasingly apparent in 2008 with the global economic recession, which essentially displayed the extent to which external forces can affect SIDS. As such, the green economy construct in terms of being low carbon, resource efficient, and socially inclusive finds an umbrella in terms of its applicability to small and developing states as a strategy for resilience to these external shocks. And this was made evident in the UNEP report titled SIDS Focused Green Economy, Analysis of Opportunities and Challenges. Of particular importance for this discussion is whether the low carbon, resource efficient, and social inclusive construct would be applicable and effective as a solution to dealing with the issues related to climate change. Now, SIDS have been recognized as being particularly at risk to climate change. In fact, the IPCC Fifth Assessment Report helps to better understand the scope of risk for SIDS. Now, risk is determined by the interaction between climate-related hazards and the vulnerability and exposure of both humans and natural systems. Now, Thomas and Baptiste 2020 frames hazards for SIDS as climate-related physical events or trends, and they frame vulnerability as a range of concepts that includes sensitivity to harm as well as capacities to cope and adapt. The vulnerability of SIDS to climate change is a complex one because economically, the very characteristics that make SIDS unique contribute to increased vulnerability to climate hazards. Sectors that are critical to SIDS, national economies such as tourism, are reliant on environmental conditions and are thus affected by changes to the environment. For example, more than half of SIDS coastal-based tourism contributes to some 20% of GDP, and climate-related disasters can result in damages of some 225% of GDP, as was the case for Dominica after Hurricane Maria in 2017. The complexity in addressing the vulnerabilities entails the adaptive capacity of SIDS to climate change. Many governments lack the necessary resources, and by that I mean personnel, finances, as well as data, to assess the risk and plan appropriate responses. Thomas and Baptiste again points out that while there are numerous adaptation programs in many SIDS, these are often short-term, which then sees them often relying on international assistance. The issue with capacity is exacerbated by the fact that there's often a need to divert resources from existing public programs to increase the capacity to respond to such actions. But the diversion of these funds, particularly, has a long-term effect on sustainable development. So based on this, it becomes apparent that SIDS have peculiar vulnerabilities to climate change as well as adaptive capabilities that pose issues for their sustainable development. As such, the green economy presents an avenue to address this particular issue for SIDS, because it is a strategy that adds the SIDS resilience to climate change issues, as well as an avenue to achieving sustainable development. In looking more closely at tourism and sustainability, to fully understand the connection between green economy and tourism, there's a need to explore some of the sustainability challenges that this sector faces. One of these areas relates to energy use. Now, the tourism sector is known for its high and growing consumption of energy, specifically in areas of travel and accommodation. The increase in energy consumption in travel stems from the growth in both international as well as domestic travel, as well as a preference for energy-intensive transportation. Accommodation is the second most energy-intensive area within the tourism sector. This primarily stems from the demand for things such as heating or cooling or lighting or cooking, pools. Even in tropical regions, there's a need for energy where water is also concerned. Now, based on the aforementioned, the tourism sector has a growing trend for travel, which is energy intensive. And this is problematic from the standpoint that it will have implications for global GHG emissions, regardless of the technological solutions aimed at energy efficiency in transport. In fact, over the next 30 to 50 years, GHG emissions from tourism sector are projected to grow substantially if we continue in this business as usual fashion. Now, sustainability related challenges also extend to things such as water consumption. Although water use within this sector on a global basis is much less than in areas such as agriculture, nonetheless, in some countries, tourism is the main factor in water consumption, whereas in other countries, the sector places increased pressure on this resource. So the data on water consumption in tourism is that between 100 to 2,000 liters per guest per night. And this is mainly attributable to things such as irrigation, swimming pools, wellness facilities, and spas. While water consumption that is directly attributable to tourism may not be high in comparison to other industries, what should remain central, especially for countries like Jamaica, is that there are nuances with which tourism operates that has a specific impact on water consumption. For example, there is a heavy concentration of tourism-related development and activities on small islands that typically have scarcity with potable water. Another area in relation to sustainability that affects the tourism sector speaks to, or looks at rather, biodiversity and ecosystem services. Now, coral reefs in particular have suffered greatly at the hands of tourism-related activities, as reefs have been destroyed by overfishing as well as sewage disposal. Other areas such as coastal wetlands and mangroves have been destroyed in many instances to construct hotels. So what is clear is that biodiversity is and will continue to be affected by tourism. Therefore, a failure to incorporate biodiversity concerns into destination planning and investment will have detrimental effects on the natural environment. Now, as it pertains to the applicability of the green economy as a solution to climate change issues, from what I would have discussed earlier, it is clear that for SIDS that there are peculiar vulnerabilities that they face. In addition to this, their adaptive capabilities are supplemented by resources from other areas, which can ultimately have a negative impact on their sustainable development. Added to this particular dynamic is the fact that within SIDS, key sectors such as tourism have sustainability issues. As such, the green economy is presented as a possible solution based on the fact that it is low carbon, resource efficient, and socially inclusive. And it has targeted public and private investments that can address economic and environmental vulnerabilities, strengthen the adaptive capabilities of these particular states, and it also can be a tool that is used to achieve sustainable development. So when we look at the green economy solutions to climate change, what becomes clear is that it can address both economic and environmental vulnerabilities, largely through aimed investments targeting a reduction of emissions and pollution, enhancing energy and resource efficiency, and protecting biodiversity and ecosystem services. A national green economy strategy for SIDS can also increase their resilience to the effects of climate change, and it can allow for long-term adaptation strategies. Also, a national green economy for SIDS can address sustainability issues in key sectors such as tourism. So what needs to happen in small and developing states such as Jamaica? The government of Jamaica needs to properly define what a green economy for Jamaica would mean. It needs to develop policies that would reflect key pillars of a green economy. And those policies should have targets that can be measured, of course. And there needs to be, of course, an investment programs rather, that would trigger economic transformation that is reflective of a transition towards a green economy. What is good is that there are a number of enabling features that can propel Jamaica and similarly other small and developing states. Off the top of my head, Barbados comes to mind. But within Jamaica's context, Vision 2030, and there are a number of other policies and organizations and agencies that have a number of data as well as the capability in terms of constructing a particular strategy towards allowing a green economy in terms of its crafting for addressing climate change related issues. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. McLeod. And I want to just quickly highlight what you mentioned there about the contribution in SIDS to the the significant contribution to GDP from coastal-based activities. And the reason why I wanted to highlight that was recently we had the United Nations Ocean Conference in Portugal from the 27th of July to the 27th of June to the 1st of July. And what was lamentable was that tourism was missing. In fact, it was Jamaica who was holding the tourism fort. And it's lamentable because based on what you've mentioned, the ocean is quite important to tourism, and tourism is quite important to the ocean. And again, of course, as you know, I like to indicate the statistics. We had a presentation at that conference from the Director General of the World Trade Organization, and she indicated that more than 3 billion people rely directly and indirectly on the ocean for their livelihoods, and that goods and services from coastal and marine environments account for $2.5 trillion US. So that is a vast economy there. In fact, I think in her words, the ocean economy would be the world's 7th largest economy. And that is significant. And to the point in terms of what Professor Waller, just to bring what Professor Waller had said earlier, the need for strategic leadership and the need to not see climate change and different portfolios as siloed and separated. The Ministry of Tourism, Minister Bartlett, did contribute to an expert perspective for the high-level panel on sustainable ocean economy. As you know, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, Prime Minister of Jamaica, is one of 16 leaders who are on this high-level panel, and Jamaica was instrumental in calling for a tourism working group within this panel. So this is a sort of activism and advocacy that we need to see, not only from our leaders, but also at different levels to ensure that we are linking climate change, protection of the environment with tourism and other sectors. So thank you so much, Mr. McLeod, for highlighting that. Now, Mr. Palmer is a corporate manager, environment, health and safety for Sandals Resorts International. And I think it is Very timely that we're closing with you as the last presentation, Mr. Palmer. So he has been a member of the Sandals team since 2017 when he joined Sandals Ochi Beach Resort as Environment, Health and Safety Manager. And in this role, which he held for 2 years, he was charged with inspecting and evaluating the environment, equipment, and procedures in all areas of the resort to ensure compliance with government safety regulations and industry standards. Now, in February of this year, Gavin was promoted to the role of Corporate Manager, Environment, Health and Safety. Congratulations, Mr. Palmer. And in addition to his years of experience in this field, Gavin holds a bachelor's degree in Energy and Environment Physics. He also holds several ISO certifications from the Bureau of Standards Jamaica, in addition to Latin America Energy Association or Organization certification in Sustainable Energy Management Systems and Evaluating Renewable Energy, as well as UNESCO IHE certification in Sustainable Coastal Management. Mr. Palmer, you're quite certified and you clearly have the expertise to close us out with your presentation, Tourism, the Climate Change Reality. You have the floor.
Thanks, Ms. Turner, for that introduction. Today's presentation will be taking the approach from the perspective of a tourism operator as to what are the threats we're facing and what are some of the practical solutions. And one of which we'll be covering is one which has actually been actioned, and I'll be showing that on screen as well. So the thing to be discussed is that many of my esteemed panelists have actually touched on what I'm about to be discussing with you. So it's very evident that these impacts are being felt within all aspects of tourism. Also, the academia, which we have on call, has done a very wonderful job in discussing statistically that which needs to be done and that which we are facing. So in introduction, we'll be discussing climate change, the threats to the industry, operational challenges which we are facing, and from an adaptation and mitigation standpoint, we have some solution in terms of sustainable coastal management and our energy management programs. So it goes without question that the effects of climate change are being felt within the industry, and in the full spirit of accountability, we are aware, and it has been discussed, that the operations within tourism contributes to greenhouse gases emissions, which leads to global warming and climate change. So we are aware of this, and as I mentioned, operationally we'll be discussing how do we move forward and what are some of the solutions. So the threats to the sector, the effects of climate change, of course, they have the adverse effects, and we're seeing that this rise in sea level, we're losing our coasts. And this is as a result of sea level rises and change in ocean current. We're seeing a change in vector ecology, and we're experiencing as well more severe weather conditions. And take a mental note of these photographs which I'm showing. This is actually a photograph from Sandals Negril, and this was taken in 2007. A study was conducted by a coastal management consulting company, and these are some of the photos which were captured. This is very evident that we are fighting to save our coast. These are sandbags being placed to protect infrastructure, to protect coconut trees along the coast. This is a reality. So the effects of sea level rising, they're leading to sand erosion, and our coastlines are retreating. And if left without any form of intervention, we know that the structural integrity of the buildings, as well as we have our huts down on the beaches, and this is an actual photograph taken in 2018. So if left without any form of intervention, we will be facing more further threats of losing our coastline, as well as compromising the structural integrity of various infrastructure along this coast. So as well, we're seeing a change in vector ecology. At first, for example, vector-borne viruses such as the malaria, the dengue fever, we have known them of the past to be a seasonal diseases. Probably in the heights of the summer, we are experiencing an increase in malaria or dengue fever. Now, across the board, all season, we're seeing increases. it's evident that changes in flora and fauna are making it more conducive now for various vectors to be bred in these conditions. As well, this leads to an increase in the population of these vectors. We're also seeing the effect of climate change leading to the gestation period of these vectors being shortened, thus resulting in an increase in population. So as well as the migration, we're having an increase in population of these vectors. And of course, we're aware of the fact that customer confidence in a location now, since the heights of COVID, has been leaned more toward now their health and safety, the perception of being safe while on the vacation. So for example, now, God forbid, there is an outbreak of malaria in a location. This hits the media. That's going to result in mass cancellations, and we all know the financial implication of this. We're seeing now, it goes without saying, we're seeing increased occurrences of severe weather conditions. I make mention of Curacao. Curacao last month saw its first tropical storm in 100 years. When we're buying insurance here at Sandals, they run their models, and the models generate 100-year events in order to bill us for a premium. And I've actually experienced a 100-year event in my lifetime. And it's frightening, and it also speaks to the disaster risk management, the resilience of these islands. Having not experienced a hurricane in 100 years, you wouldn't have been prepared, So it's important that even if it's outside the band, islands outside the hurricane band, we see now we have to be requesting to ensure that hurricane inventories are maintained across all resorts, even outside of the usual hurricane season, the June to the November. So we're having resorts on standpoint for severe weather conditions outside these stipulated season. Also, we're experiencing droughts. Of many of our resorts, we have backup water tanks, and along with backup water tanks, we have wells which are fed from aquifers or water tables. So we're seeing now an increased reliance on the municipal water supply. And of course, it's as a result of droughts, and we are all aware of the financial implications which comes with this, having to be maintaining a well and also having to be paying the municipal, in Jamaica's case, NWC. So from a solution-based standpoint, in terms of adaptation, I've shown you on screen the photographs with where we're having to be padding our buildings with sandbags. So this was a photograph I took 3 days ago down in Negril. So we actually implemented through coastal engineering, sustainable coastal engineering, a method to reclaim our beach as we call it. This is Sandals Negril. If the building which was padded by, I'm not sure if you're seeing my mouse, but the building which was padded by those sandbags is actually this building which I'm circling with the mouse, where you see that the lady walking next to the building here. So we have reclaimed a lot of the beach, and this is a reference photograph. So it's important that we know that we're losing the beaches, and it's important to note as well that this study was conducted along so we have modeling for all the Negril beach, but this method was employed at Sandals Negril as a case study, and we're seeing the success here on screen. So through sustainable coastal engineering, we're able to reclaim and re-nourish our beaches. And it's not only Negril where we're facing this threat, we're seeing it across all jurisdictions in which we operate: the Barbados, the Bahamas, the Turks and Caicos as well. So here, this is the method. So through coastal engineering, we're able to introduce 6 low-profile grinds, non-invasive grinds, and of course, there is definitely a consideration placed on ecosystem preservation and its impact, which was done, assessed, and in full compliance with the regulatory bodies in this location, NEPA, UDC, etc. This method was employed, and we're seeing the results here on screen. So as I said, this presentation, I'm taking the operational solution-based approach to these impacts. In this case, sea level rises and changing ocean current. As I mentioned, this is a reality across the Caribbean. This isn't Jamaica. We have on screen here Barbados, Turks and Caicos, and Bahamas. So this is a reality, especially in terms of being climate resilient and disaster risk. From a disaster risk management standpoint, it's important that we are aware of these risks which we're facing. And we are losing our beaches, and we know we sell the sun, sea, and sand. Yes, there are alternative tourism being sold, but the sun, sea, and sand is a very marketable approach to tourism, which it's a threat. So I won't be long today, but from a mitigation standpoint, as mentioned, tourism does contribute greatly to the emissions of greenhouse gases. We have to be heating our water, heating from electricity, heating from fossil fuels, such as LPG. So some of the solutions which we've implemented, we have a LED lighting program where we change over. We are all familiar with the incandescent light bulbs, which is very energy intensive. We move away from that incandescence to the fluorescent have passed, and now we're fully LED across our resort. Also, we have moved to inverter AC units and also centralized cooling in our HVAC programs. We have implemented at 3 resorts currently, Barbados, Turks and Caicos, and Grenada. We have our building management systems where, for example, I'm supposed to leave, if I leave this office, a sensor is in place that turns off the light automatically, turns off the air condition. Because not all, we stress our sustainable mandates with our guests, our team members, but human factor at play, it's best to have it automated. And also, we have our electric golf carts. Of course, we still have, in spirit of accountability, we still have high energy intensive or fossil fuel dependent motor vehicles being utilized. However, we're taking small steps to move away from this in a more sustainable approach. So in concluding, it's important, it was mentioned, the public-private partnership. It's important that all players, from the academia to the private sector and the government entities, we all sit at the same table. We preach the same language. The statistics are here. The reality we are facing, it's been discussed now. So it's important that we all act. Action is necessary. So from a sustainability standpoint, the solution presented, we have the Sustainable Coastal Management Initiative, a case study being that which we have displayed from Sandals, Negril, but all beaches across the Caribbean are a threat. We are losing our beaches, it's a reality. And from a disaster risk management standpoint, each, as I mentioned, all our resorts we have on standby, even outside hurricane season. To have all hurricane inventory at standard, we have established SPARs, and so it's important that we are expecting what we consider freak events, freak storms across the calendar year, and also ensuring that greenhouse gases reduction programs are in place, and they are improved upon year after year. So we have established standard, but we are also looking for further initiatives to implement within our operation. So thanks for your time. Ms. Turner, over back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. So you've just heard from Mr. Gavin Palmer, who is the Corporate Manager, Environment, Health and Safety at Sandal Resorts International. And I just love your closing message. We need to act. And I know most of us Jamaicans know this song, action, not a bag of mouth. For our foreigners who are on social media, that means action and not just words. And in connection with our audience, now it's one of my favorite times in the program because we have heard from our presenters. They've been quite insightful. And I know we have Professor Waller there. I'm seeing Mr. May, Mr. Palmer, Mr. McLeod, all ready to field your questions. But before I go into the questions, I'm going to share some of the comments that I've been receiving. So we have Bella Abbey, user Bella Abbey from Instagram, who commented that we also need to focus more on ecosystem. And this is quite interesting, or ecotourism rather. This is quite interesting because as Mr. Palmer just closed with, sun, sea, sand is quite attractive. It's what we have been selling. But even ecotourism itself is quite dependent on what we do in terms of climate change mitigation and adaptation. And I do agree that this is one area in which we could move towards. Also, we have Shadane Ferraro on YouTube. Welcome, Shadane. She's agreeing with Professor Waller's earlier point that it's a great idea to include the younger generation in climate change initiatives. And thanks to Chevelle Dennis on YouTube, who has indicated to our panelists that this is rather an insightful discussion. So to kickstart the questions, we have from Bella Abbey on Instagram. She wants to know if there are any plans to develop a climate resilient certification. And I know, Mr. Palmer, you seem to be the certification guru, but not only that, Mr. May, I think your company has worked with EarthCheck, and my understanding is that EarthCheck is considered the world's leading scientific and benchmarking certification and advisory group for travel and tourism. So I'm going to throw this question to you first, Mr. May, followed by Mr. Palmer. Any plans to develop a climate resilient certification? And I would want to tag for the travel and tourism industry in Jamaica. You may wish to unmute.
Let me unmute this time. There you go. Thanks for the question, Bella Abbey. There are, in the way you stated it, plans to create certification. I think all the bones are there to ensure that the certification can be achieved. As Taisha mentioned, EarthCheck as an entity and a number of other entities actually have destination management certification, which are driven and focused on sustainability. They have individual entity certification, which can be for hotels, airlines, taxi cab companies, and so on. So the framework is already there. And even our very own Ministry of Tourism, when the TPD code comes in and does their assessment, there is an element of sustainability that is covered in those assessments. I think what may answer your question is how quickly can we get to a cohesive singular assessment program for our tourism industry, and that's something that is very open and on the table. We've had conversations with the government in the past, and it may very well be fine time to get back to that kind of a conversation now. I will tell you at the point of the original conversation, there were no negative experiences towards it. So I do know that the government is actively engaged in ensuring that that this type of recognition is available. And I think if you go from Professor Waller's program where he mentioned the Prof, if you don't, I don't remember the acronym for your entity, but that kind of development and involvement by the government is definitely something that shows they are not far off from this kind of program.
Thank you, Richard. It's the GTRCMC. It's quite a mouthful for me as well. Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center. Mr. Palmer, anything to add on that? Plans for developing a climate resilient certification? You're the certification man.
In terms of our plans, as Mr. May had mentioned, the bones are already in place. As it relates now to, for example, a private sector entity aiming to be certified. We have the Green Globe, we have EarthCheck, which Sandals has signed up in over 18 years now, going strong. So there are certification bodies which private sector entities can sign up for, and these management systems which you have to conform to, you have stipulated guidelines which they have to be met in order to achieve same certification. So yeah, the bones are already in place, as Richard May had mentioned. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mr. May and Mr. Palmer. Now, our next question I'm going to throw to academia. I'm going to begin with you, Prof. Since you're the ICT digital governance specialist, we have the Homework Club on Instagram asking, are we using technology to combat climate change and aid tourism?
Yes, sir. So certainly there's many entities that are using, many companies that are using climate technologies, and we advocate for the use of it. And this ranges from the use of solar energy to provide energy to a hotel, to wind turbines, to and in countries such as Kenya and Nairobi. Nairobi. Taisha, it's the second time, right? In Kenya and Nairobi, and also in Saudi Arabia when it comes to wind turbines as well. But we also advocate for the use of the data centers to manage data at the hotel, or a data center at the hotel that is driven by renewable energy. So we do have a number of projects that we advocate for across the world to encourage the use of renewable energy on one hand in tourism, but at the same time, digital technologies that can contribute to mitigating the impact on the environment itself. Nairobi, sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Professor Wallet. The best of us get tongue-tied at times, believe me. So, Mr. McLeod, anything to add to that in terms of technology and how we can use it as a tool to combat climate change in alien tourism? You may wish to unmute.
Just having a bit of difficulty there. So as pertains to technology, what I have observed when you look at the international spaces, that particularly in tourism as well as in a number of other sectors, there's an increase in terms of startups to fund investments and technologically sound investments, sustainably sound investments, re-technology and re-technological use across the tourism landscape. Not only speaking to just hotels, but also to particular linkages within the transportation sector, within the agricultural sector. And so there are a number of policies globally that I have observed in relation to those particular linkages in terms of how transportation is conducted, particularly where EVs are conducted, the use of particular technology as it pertains to electrical usage and PVC for heating, cooling, these purposes. So there's much more to explore, as well as what Prof. Waller indicated.
Thank you, Mr. McLeod and Prof. Waller. And I think even Mr. Palmer had mentioned some technology that his office uses when he leaves the room. The sensor, it senses that no one is using the electricity, and so the AC and the lights go off. So I think that's quite useful in terms of the application of technology as well. Now, even though we have all this data, we have all these advocates, there still exist some climate change deniers. And I'd like to hear from each of the panelists, what do you say to persons, even with all the good research and data, that say climate change does not exist, it is a ruse, it is a dupe? How do you, if you were speaking to a climate change denier, how would you address that? And I'm going to start and continue in the order of the speakers. So Professor Waller first, followed by Mr. May, Mr. McLeod, and then Mr. Palmer.
Well, my simple response would essentially just be look around you. We're having wildfires in Europe, in the United States, in Australia. We're having temperatures at levels that we've not seen in years, and the evidence is phenomenal, and the evidence is around us every day. And to be quite frank, I do understand those persons who would want to say that historically, throughout human history, the planet has actually cooled and warmed. However, the very argument is the explanation that we don't want to be in a place where the planet is just too hot, unlivable, or too cold and unlivable. And if you're going to be using the argument that we've been here, done that before, when it's a cycle, then something must have triggered the cycle, and we don't really want to go back to that place, that moment in human history again. And just a little plug for our book. So Minister Bartlett and I edited a book on tourism resilience, recovery, and global sustainability for development. And many of these issues are actually explored in that book. It's available on Amazon with a number of chapters that extends most of these different activities, including the impact of climate on tourism and tourism on the climate itself, as well as technologies for climate management. So I'm just using the opportunity to make a little plug for the book itself.
That's quite welcome, Professor. Thank you. Mr. May, I notice that you're nodding. I know you prefer Richard as well. You're nodding as Prof was speaking. What do you have to add? What would you say to the climate denial?
I am in full agreement with the Prof. Whether the history indicates that, the climate has cooled and warmed, it is, to me, evident that our industrial and regular day-to-day activities have contributed to the existing warming. And whether we can argue that it has cooled and warmed is irrelevant, in my opinion, because the fact is we have to live in what is becoming an increasingly untenable physical environment. And if we can do something to better it, then we should. If we can see that our actions are maybe catalyzing the frequency or the pace of the heating, then do something about it, because we actually have to live in it. More importantly, as a parent, I think we owe it to the next generation to leave them or have them in a place that they can survive and enjoy what we used to enjoy as younger people. All right. So for the climate denial, I deny the climate denials.
I like the way you said that. Denying the climate denials. Mr. McLeod, what do you say?
If we're looking at the climate deniers in terms of a singular conversation, whether or not climate actually changes, then they will be spot on. Yes. But if we were to assess it in terms of the rate at which the climate change and the effects of that rate and the reason behind that particular rate, then it's evident that human beings have an impact on climate change and thus the effects of climate change. And as Mr. May mentioned, what is key is that we are contributing to the speed and impact of that those effects. And we would not want to leave it for future generations in an untenable and unrepairable type of manner. So that's my response.
I do agree, just to indicate, before I go to Mr. Palmer, just to share that global greenhouse gas emissions, it's indicated that this needs to be halved by 2030 for the international community to stand a chance of achieving the Paris Agreement goal of maximum 1.5 degrees Celsius average temperature rise. I think, again, the science is there. So, Mr. Palmer, to close with you, if you had a climate change denier in front of you, what would you say to them?
Well, I've actually had quite a few of those conversations, those debates. So in agreement, this in terms of a cycle, the world has gone through quite a few cycles. However, we can't be denying accountability in terms of our impact on the environment. So we do, our activities lead to emissions, our activities lead to an increase in the warming effect on the world, and also climate change. We can't be denying accountability. So that has always been my point of view, my rebutting statement. We can't deny our actions and our impact in climate change. Yeah.
Agreed. Sometimes when we don't see the direct impact, if it's not directly affecting us in a way that we can pinpoint that this directly affects Taisho, there really is no push. And I know, Richard, you spoke to this earlier in terms of individual responsibility. And I want to hear again from all of you, as a tourist, what is one clear example of how you have experienced as a tourist that the climate change has been impacting on your tourism experience? Now, I'll give two. I'm going to give one generally from the news and one personally. Now, in Louisiana, their state bird is the brown pelican. In 2010, they had 15 low-lying islands with several nesting colonies. Now, in this year, 2022, that has gone to 6. We're talking about the national bird for a state, the national state bird. Personally, as someone who lives in Kingston and environs, Helsha, when you talk about climate change and rising sea levels, we probably still do enjoy going out to Helsha to have fish and festival, but you can't really truck off into the water for non-Jamaicans, that's dive. You can't really dive into the water and have a swim because there's really no good beach. So for me, that has been my personal tourism experience as it relates to how climate change has been affecting my experience as a tourist. So again, in the same order, Prof. Richard, Glenville, and Gavin, I want to hear from you, your specific experience as a tourist, not just professional, your specific experience as a tourist that you can say, this is how climate change is affecting tourism. And I'd also like to hear from our audience on social media. If you're on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, I want to hear, as a tourist, domestic, international tourist, how has climate change been impacting your experience? So, Prof?
Well, I mean, for me, it will always be Helsha. Helsha is the clear example of locally of how the climate change itself has impacted a tourism space, because it's an excellent attraction and also a nice place for persons to get tourists to get a good meal, and it's historically linked to what is Jamaica. Helsha, Port Royal, Blue Mountains, Devon House, and all of these different places and spaces, and it's very unfortunate that it's where it is right now, but it's also an indicator and a warning that the other sites are also at risk if we don't act to ensure the sustainability of the climate and connectively the tourism sector itself.
It's a beautiful thing to go first as a moderator, so I get to say Helsha, but nobody else can use Helsha.
Well, if you want me to give another example, outside of Jamaica, I can. Recently I went to Greece and I was trekking up to the mountain with the Oracle of Delphi, and an entire section was cordoned off because they over tourism. The persons trampled on the site, destroyed historic sites that have been there for hundreds of years, and they had to, after a while, they had to try to see how best to preserve it, the space itself, not just the monuments, but also the space that the tourists were accessing. So I think they came up with a strategy whereby for each quarter of the year, they use a different trek to minimize the impact on the environment for that particular trek itself. So that is one example, and also a solution for the problem itself.
Okay, all the way from in Greece. Richard?
Yes, my experience is closer to home. When I was in my teen years and younger, used to go to Treasure Beach, Great Bay actually, to the beach, like almost, if not every weekend, every other weekend across summer and so on. There was an active fishing village, it's an active fishing community, and the beach was always full of people. Over the last, I would say, decade, when I got to Great Bay, first off, and maybe it's age, I don't know, personally cannot handle the heat physically on the beach. It is much warmer there than it would have been in years gone by, one. And two, the fishermen, the fishermen will tell you that the kind of catches they used to have, the size of the fish, the size of the catches, everything surrounding fishing has significantly changed. And there has not been much infrastructure development. There has not been any removal of things like mangroves and stuff in the immediate vicinity of the bay. The only thing they can tell you is that, in their words, it wasn't like this before. The place has just gotten hot and the water is not what it used to be. All right. Now, those things for me are pollution oriented, climate change oriented, but that's the one that jumps out on me. That is not work related. All right.
Thank you, Richard. You've met all the criteria there. Glenville, what's your experience at tourist?
Well, currently I'm in the UK, and this is, put it this way, I'm wearing a long sleeve shirt and I'm hot. I haven't worn a jacket or a coat in the past 2.5 weeks, which is completely unusual for the UK. Even at nighttime, it feels like essentially like I'm in Kingston, which is good and bad. But this is clear evidence that there is climate change. Even yesterday, I was unable to travel because issues with melting train lines because of the heat in the UK, and other various features directly related to climate change. So in my capacity now as a tourist, I'm feeling the impact of climate change, and it's very visible. Trust me, I see a lot of persons walking outside of my house right here, and it would seem as if I'm in Miami more so than the UK, right? So it's very visible.
So we have Europe, we've had Greece, we have had the UK, we have had Jamaica, Kingston, St. Catherine, Treasure Beach down in St. Elizabeth. And I was just in Treasure Beach, Richard, I agree with you. It was really hot, even just being smack dab by the sea. And even with the breeze, it was still just almost unbearably hot. So Gavin, I know you work in tourism. You're always surrounded by tourists, but on the opportunities that you do get to be a tourist yourself, please, what has been your experience, recap?
Yeah, I'm a tourist on all of my business trips. So whenever I go to a new location, I enjoy these locations. As of recent, I was recently in Curacao, and I know it's closer to the equator, slightly below the equator. However, it was unbearably hot down there. Was on the beach, and yeah, I couldn't function. I didn't spend, I think, an hour on the beach. So I limited the activities to nighttime, and even in the night, I was sweating as well. So yeah, so it's evident that we're feeling the effects of climate change. We hear mentioned the sand erosion, losing our beaches, but we're definitely feeling the intensity of this heat. Yeah, so that's it from me.
All right, thank you to our panelists. And just to share from much farther away, also as states Palau, recently at that UN Ocean conference that I mentioned, there's an ambassador there from Palau, and Palau, apparently their tourism contributes 50% to GDP. That is huge. And their government has taken the step to make an immigration legislative amendment where all visitors to Palau, no matter the airline, you have to sit and listen to a video before entry on environmental protection. And their tagline is to tread lightly, treat kindly, and leave only footprints that can be washed away. And I think that is useful. That's something else that they have done is they have started using crocodile farms and bird sanctuaries to attract visitors away from the ocean to allow for that replenishment and rejuvenation. You know, I always like to say time flies when you're having fun. And I've certainly been having some fun. I hope our viewers have been having fun as well. And I understand that there is strong interest for the presentations that were delivered today. So for Beresford Watson on YouTube, you had asked if it was possible to get the presentation. I'm just going to ask you to email us at tourismlinkages@tef.gov.jm. I'll repeat, tourismlinkages@tef, that's TEF.gov.jm, and my colleagues will get the presentations to you. So thank you for joining us. I hope you found the information valuable. I'm sure the presenters all learned from each other. I certainly learned from all of you, your experiences and questions. And if you want to re-watch this discussion and the entire series, please visit Tourism Enhancement Fund's YouTube and Facebook pages to find the complete videos. Thank you to Steph, thank you to TFN, thank you to our presenters, and to you, importantly, audience. It was my pleasure being your moderator. I'm Patrick Turner. Have a good day.